Welcome back to Blurred Summits. Today we have with us Antoni Lacinai. He's here to talk about communication with us. Thank you so much for coming on today, Antoni.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so let's just hop right into things. Your area of expertise is communication. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
That is a fair assessment. It's a huge area, but I focus on human communication or even more specific, workplace communication.
Workplace communication. And so what do you think is the number one thing that you wish people knew about human communication or workplace communication that you think people misunderstand?
We have a generic misunderstanding that we think that communication is easy. And it's not. We misunderstand each other all the time. And I guess that's, the reason for us having this belief is probably that we started to learn one words when we were 1 year old, and 2 words, and then 3 words, and then sentences. And then we think, we can communicate. It's not that easy.
Okay. So how do we get better at it? Like what are the things that we have to do to improve?
Like so many other things, this is about being conscious about it and train. Understand that not everybody is like you. This is also one of those misconceptions that we think that just because I like to communicate in a certain way means that everybody likes that. And that's not the case either. You probably heard, Abdul, when people say, treat others like you want to be treated. Well, that's not necessarily true when it comes to communication. Perhaps you should say, communicate with others the way they want to be communicated with. And that means that you have to put yourself in another person's shoes and understand how they function and how they work, which requires then one of the 3 superpowers of communication, according to me, which is empathy.
Okay, so the 3 powers of communication. What are the 3 powers? You mentioned one.
Empathy is number 1. Then that's about you believing that I really want to understand you, that you feel that I get you. And the second one is clarity, which means that you understand me if I speak. And the third one is energy, and that is about delivery. That's a lot about nonverbal communication, like how you look and how you sound and so on. So if you have empathy, then it's much easier for you to design a message with clarity and then deliver it with the right proportion of energy. So that's how I see it.
So what are some strategies for us as communicators to develop that empathy with other people?
Well, one of the things that we have to consider, of course, is how interested are we in other people? Are we interested in so many people are not interested, they are interested in themselves. If you find out, trying to find out how many people are really interested in you, you would be depressed. It's like we have this idea that everything circles around us. Like the saying goes, enough talk about me, let's talk about you. What do you think about me? And then it's back to me again. And that's one of those problems we have. So just realizing that, and understanding that we have this problem and other people have it as well. We always kind of relate everything that goes around us with us. And if you want to have true empathy, that means that you have to kind of step out of your own inner thoughts and your own inner chatter and just focus on the other person. And that requires, of course, concentration, presence, curiosity, ability to ask questions, ask more questions, listen, not to respond, but to understand. That's a huge difference. Many people listen just to respond.
Right. And so, sometimes with myself, when I try to really engage with the person and listen to understand what that person is saying rather than listening to respond. But a lot of times I catch myself when they say something interesting or something that I really like they said, and I want to jump in, but I hold myself back to let them finish their point. But now all I'm thinking about is that response, right? Do you have any tips for me as to how I can overcome that?
First of all, congratulations that you managed to still yourself and contain those feelings and not just interrupt people, but wait. That's good, because I see so many times that we just jump in, we take over the conversation. Oh, stop talking! I heard you said something. I want to talk about that. And then, it depends on the situation as well. If you were friends, if you were, you're having dinner with friends and you have this conversation going back and forth, and somebody says, "Hey, I just listened to this great podcast with Abdul and Antoni," and then somebody else would say, "Oh, but I listened to another podcast with," and then they talk about that because podcast came up, and that was the area that they wanted to keep going with. But I mean, that works fine in a context where you, with your friends, people know each other already. But if it's more of a professional situation, then it doesn't work as well. So then we need to just say, okay, mental note, I want to come back to this later, but let me just listen now. Keep listening. And then you might want to add something to the conversation that they've talked about, saying, "You know what, I have the same experience, blah, blah, blah." And then you can go back into asking questions. Actually, the one who asks the question is the one who steers the conversation. That could be good to know. Let's say that you have a situation where you are applying for a job and you have this job interview and all you do is to answer questions. That means that you are reactive all the time. But if you start asking questions yourself, it means that you're proactive, and that also means that you come into this discussion on an even playing field. You're kind of two equals meeting here, which could be the difference otherwise if only one person is asking the questions. A good salesperson is really good at asking questions, for instance, because then they get more information. The bad person is the one who does not ask questions, but just use what I call sometimes the blowtorch effect or the hairdryer effect, where you just aim your hairdryer towards the other person and they're just go like that, and then the other person cannot even talk because it's too loud. So that's actually good advice. Ask more questions, at least if you want to have information and if you want to steer the conversation.
Yeah, so that's interesting, because normally you'd think that the person who's saying the ideas, the person who's speaking, who's expressing themselves, they're the one who's directing where the conversation's going. But it sounds like what you're saying is that actually we should focus more not on speaking or telling people things, but we should be asking questions to receive more information.
If you want information, the best thing you can do is to shut up and listen. But if you want to tell people, if you want to teach people things, then of course it's another thing. Then you can start asking questions. Now, this doesn't go for every situation. For this instance, in this case, you are, the podcaster. You ask most of the questions. I come in as an expert. You already introduced me as an expert, so I have that credibility now with my TEDx and all that. And then I can talk because I have something to add to this by answering your questions now. Of course, but I don't steer the conversation. You steer the conversation. I can, if I'm trained at it, and politicians are really good at this, taking whatever question you have and then turn it into my question of choice and then answering that question instead. Just listen to politicians when they do that. They are so good at it, some of them. Yeah, I understand that the budget question is a really important one, but if you look at it, the most important question is how we should build bridges or not. And then we talk about bridges instead, because that's my area of expertise or something like that. It's very common that could happen.
And so do you think when people do that, when they take a question and they kind of steer it in a different way, because sometimes people think, politicians, they're not the most trustworthy people. We can't really build so much rapport with them, that kind of stuff. Do you think that when we do that, when we try and steer the conversation away, that it breaks down trust?
It is potentially, there is a potential risk for it, at least. I'm not saying that it happens every time, but there is a risk that people get that kind of intuitive feeling that that question wasn't really answered here. Why was that? Did he or she misunderstand me? Should I ask the question again? Most of the time, they don't ask the question again. They just ask a new question instead.
Okay. And so something that a different topic that I want to touch on a little bit right now is when you first meet somebody new, right? And they always talk about the importance of first impressions, right? Making a good first impression is very, very important. How do we make a good first impression?
How would you make a first impression, a good one?
I would go and say, "Hi, my name is Abdul," and smile, right? Seem to have a friendly attitude, be positive. I think that's a lot better than just kind of going in there and being a bit of a downer. Nobody likes somebody who's always down, right? But beyond that, I'm not too sure what the stage between first meeting someone and developing rapport, that seems like such a gray area to me. Like it almost seems like one day you wake up and all of a sudden you have rapport, right? Like what are the steps? What are the tangible steps? I'm not too sure.
Yeah, let's divide it into different sections in the process here. I can't remember where I read it, but I read somewhere that it takes the brain 0.35 seconds, facial expression. So that's a fraction of a second. It's shorter than the conscious brain is working. So if you meet somebody, you will form an opinion of them, whether or not they are a threat, within less than half a second. But your brain needs around half a second to be conscious about it, which means that you already made your mind up about that person before you even know it. Mm. So it's that short when it comes to the immediate first impression. So of course, if you have an open body language, if you smile, like a genuine smile where you can see it in the eyes, then you have already at that point created what I call a green light in the person's brain, especially in the part which I call the bodyguard, survival mode. Yeah, this is a green light. I think that this person is good. Now we can go into the next phase about building rapport, but that comes as the next step. The first step is just, is this person a threat or not? And if you smile, if you have an open body language, I can see the wrists or your palms and so on. I can feel that you don't have anything to hide. You have no weapons in your hand. You have a genuine smile. I can feel less threatened, which means that I can get closer to you as well. Then we can talk about building rapport, which is about getting kind of the right chemistry. And that is about different things, like, for instance, the energy levels, the speed, the tempo of the conversation. It could be body language. Do you match each other or not, and things like that. But that comes like a second part of it.
Okay. And how important do you think body language is in communication, right? So you said in the first impression, it's almost everything, right? Because the brain makes its decision up, yeah, right? It makes the decision so quickly, right? But in communication in general, how important is body language?
If you look at the human species, the first thing we got when it comes to communication was nonverbal communication, which means that we had body language and grunts, basically. So that's the oldest form of communication that we know. If you look at the spoken language, that's way later that came into play. So yes, I would say that nonverbal communication, like for instance body language, plays a huge part. And you know it if you meet somebody and everything that they say is a disconnect with how they say it. If they shake their head and say, "Yeah, very nice to meet you," but you see it in their whole body language, they don't mean it, you will not believe what they say. You will believe what their body is saying, which means that's what it's called, body language. It is a language. We can detect things. We're not accurate all the time. I can't say that we are 100% correct every time we detect something or try to interpret people. Not at all. I mean, I have a situation where I look at somebody and thinking, "Oh my God, they are angry at me." And I talk to them afterwards, say, "You look like you were a bit angry at me." No, I was just so concentrated. That was my concentration phase. Okay, thank you. Now I know. So we also have to respect the fact that we need to sometimes calibrate people. I mean, we haven't met before, Abdul. We see each other now because this is also a Zoom call. So I'm trying to kind of calibrate you now, say, this is probably his thinking phase, or this is when he is concerned, or this is when he's happy, and so on. There are some universal expressions, of course, like happiness, surprise, content, things like that. But otherwise, it's not that easy. Again, communication is really hard, but we trust our gut instinct.
What are the three biggest things that people should pay attention to in regards to their body language when they're meeting new people or trying to communicate with people?
I can give you a couple of things that they should avoid. Can we start there? What do you think about that?
Yeah. Okay, let's avoid. Yeah, what should we avoid?
All right. If you're in a physical setting, you should avoid invading people's personal space. That's really uncomfortable if people come too close to you. And that's personal space is different for each person and for different cultures and so on. But just be aware of, if you're too close to a person, you really must be very trustworthy if you're supposed to be in the inner circle, so to say. Otherwise, people would just back off, you know. The other one you can avoid when it comes to nonverbal communication is put your nose up in the air. Because if you do that, you will come across as arrogant and superior in a not a very nice way. And the third thing you can do is you should avoid is using non-words, you know, like using all those, you know, that becomes extremely annoying after a while. So that was 3 things you can avoid when it comes to the physical space. From a virtual perspective, I would say people who never look into the camera, that's really bad advice to do that. Or having super bad tech, so I can't see you or hear you. That's also a problem sometimes. And I can see so many people in the virtual space who have, you know, perhaps the sunlight behind them. So all I can see is a silhouette. Not good. And perhaps to use a very monotonous voice where you don't show any type of passion as well. But if you talk about...
So with looking at the webcam...
Yes.
Is that one... So, you know, you said make sure you kind of look at the webcam, but for some people that's a little bit weird, right? Because you're almost not looking at the person anymore. You're looking at a camera, right?
Yes, this is true. This is weird. We're not wired to do this. But if you want to create a feeling of eye contact, then you look into the camera, knowing that you won't see the other person's eyes.
Okay.
So my biggest advice there is to look into the camera when you speak, at least, and then you might look down when the other person is speaking.
Okay. I will take that tip and try my best to do it. I definitely always look at the person, but I'll try to start looking at the camera a lot more when I'm talking.
Yeah, if you want to create a feeling of contact, then eye contact is what you want to go for.
Okay. And so something that you mentioned in your TED Talk that I really liked was be interested, not interesting, right? Or focus on being interested rather than being interesting. And so, if I'm not mistaken, the idea behind that concept was try your best to engage with the other person, be curious about what the other person's doing, and get them talking about what they care about rather than what you might necessarily care about. Is there a balance to this to where if it's done poorly, it can feel like you're almost interrogating the person?
Yeah, if you do it badly and without the proper intent, it could absolutely feel that you are interrogating a person. Also, if you ask questions but you really don't care, that's another one. I just talked to a new friend of mine, Jackie, lives in Colorado, I think it is. And she said that if you have a person who asks a lot of questions, but you can clearly see that they are not interested in the answers, she calls them ask holes. And you don't want to be an asshole. So if you ask questions, do it with the right intention of actually trying to understand something or being curious and interested. And the cool thing about this is that if you are interested rather than interesting, you become interesting. People like other people.
What do you mean by that?
People like to hang around with people who are interested in them. They open up. They start to kind of be curious back. If you ask me questions and I feel seen and heard and respected and all that, I will open up and I will start asking you questions. So whenever you have an opinion, I will listen even more to you because you expressed interest in me. So you gave me this gift, which means that I want to give you something back. You know, it's the power of reciprocation. Is it called reciprocation? Oh, that's a hard English word.
Yeah. Reciprocity, reciprocation,
yes, exactly. Yeah.
Something like that.
Study Robert Cialdini's book, Influence. It's a really good one if you're into that area.
Awesome. Okay. And so one other thing that you talked about in your TED Talk, now that we're on the topic of the TED Talk, I want to dive into some of the things that you talked about
Sure.
that I really liked.
Yeah.
You were talking about eye contact, right? And we spoke about this a little bit earlier on in the podcast, but when it comes to eye contact, there's so many different opinions out there about what you should do. Some people say you should maintain eye contact as much as possible. Some people say, well, no, it depends on if it's a person in power versus a person who's not in power. Some people say maintain eye contact if it's with the opposite gender, but not with the same gender. So there's all these kinds of different rules. Do you have a rule of thumb about how a person should go about making eye contact?
It is tricky, and it's also tricky because of the cultural differences. In some countries or cultures, you are not actually looking at each other much at all, and in other ones, you're just staring at each other. So it's different from that perspective as well. I would say that the general rule of thumb, if you have a one-on-one conversation, is to have something around 60-70% eye contact. So you shouldn't avoid eye contact, because then it feels like you have something to hide or that you're uncomfortable in the situation. But if you stare at me for too long, you will actually signal, and I said that in my TED Talk as well, you will signal either dominance or aggression or lust. So, which means that if I look at you for too long, too much, without perhaps even blinking, I send you this nonverbal signal of either I want to kill you or I want to make babies. And I don't think that any of those are appropriate, right? So it is a smart thing to look away. You can look at the other person more when they speak. Not all the time, but much more. Then you show that you're interested in what they're saying. You might also add things like nodding, and like you just did. They can't see you. They can't see that, but I see you, and you nodded right now, which means that we are in tune here.
Yeah.
But then when it's your turn, it's quite okay to just look away for a while and then come back into the conversation again, because that's what we do in normal life. So you can do that. You can practice that if you want to, but normally it comes naturally. But I'm not saying it does every time. So looking at somebody should not feel that it is a dominance contest. But I've seen studies somewhere, I can't remember where. I'm so bad at collecting sources. I have tons of them, but I also forget some of them. That people of power tend to blink less. So if you have rapid blinking, that means that you're a bit nervous somehow, and that you're more submissive or low status compared to people who blink less. So that could be something to just consider, at least if you're in a situation where you need to show some sort of power or influence or something like that. Just be steady, have a steady gaze, but don't psycho stare at people.
Okay. Now, what should we do with the rest of our body when we're talking to someone? In your TED Talk, you spoke about, hands like facing up, facing down. I thought that was interesting. But what should we do, with the rest of our body? Now we've kind of locked in with the head, right? We're good with the eye contact, with the smiling, we're engaging. But when we're standing, how should we stand?
Are we not talking about a one-on-one conversation, or are we talking about the presentation situation?
Let's do a one-on-one conversation. A lot of our audience, they're university students. So when they're talking with their friends, when they're meeting a classmate, stuff like that.
Okay, yeah. So things that you can do if you want to ooze charisma and be a person that is likable is that you should lean forward just a bit towards them so that they feel that you're really there and interested in them. You should validate, hum, nod, things like that in order for them to feel that you're into the conversation. You could absolutely use your arms, especially when it's your turn to speak. Using arms to express things means that you're also more passionate in the topic that you're talking about. If you don't use your arms at all, then it's all in your head, and it becomes harder for you to express emotions then. Actually, the hand movements is very closely in the brain. The hand movements is very close to the speech. And sometimes, if you don't know what to say, you should just use your hands, because then, if you start using your hands, then the speech will come, which is pretty interesting, I think, at least. So, using your hands, like instead of just letting them hang there, is probably a smart way to work, or to have a conversation. But you don't have to do all that much, really. It's about just being there, being attentive, being present, not drifting away, and the rest will kind of follow.
Okay. Now, we all have those moments in conversations where we hit a bit of a low moment. The person finished their point. Maybe you don't have anything more that you want to add or that you want to ask. What do we do in those moments? What are some things that we can think about to not have that awkward pause where it seems like everyone's just standing around?
So you mean that we have this kind of strange silence going on?
Exactly.
That has happened to me many times as well. I don't know what to say more now, and I don't get anything from the other person. I'm lost here. I guess it depends on the situation. Sometimes perhaps the awkwardness is something that you experience, but the other person is not. I have two sons. One is in the university right now, and he's more of an introvert. And we can sit in the car for 2 hours, and he's perfectly happy not talking. But for me, I get the rash. I need to say something, and I try to engage him, and the only way to engage him is to talk about things that he's really interested in. Otherwise, he's just happy to be quiet. So sometimes you just have to think about, is it me or is it them that is uncomfortable in this silence? But it could also be that you just haven't found anything interesting to talk about with this person, or you kind of forgot to ask follow-up questions, or you're not interested. If you talk to people and they get a chance to talk to what they about things that they like, just like you mentioned before, chances are that they will keep talking because now they're into a topic that they like and are engaged in. If they get a couple of more questions, they will just go for it. I remember one person that I believed was so dull, so boring, so gray. Everything was gray around him. His clothes, his hair, his skin, it was just gray. The doors to the supermarket wouldn't even open when he came there. That was my impression of him. And then I decided, oh, come on, Antoni, you're supposed to know this. Be interested. And I asked him just 1 or 2 questions about what he did outside of work, and he just blossomed. He started to talk with enthusiasm about how he helped kids who had a tough time at home, and he went on for 45 minutes. And I just popped in a question or two in the middle, and that's it. And then after 45 minutes, I had to excuse myself and say, I have to take care of this prize ceremony. I was an MC at that point in this company, and he stood up as well, and he shook my hand vigorously and said, "Thank you for a great discussion." And I'll tell you right now, that was not a discussion. I asked him a couple of questions, and he just went for it. That was pretty cool, actually. A reminder for me that if I ask the right questions, things will happen. Magic will happen. But sometimes you just meet people who don't give anything back. They just don't. And I think that you can just excuse yourself and leave. To communicate is like a dance. Of course, you can dance alone, but it's kind of best to do it if both parties want to dance and both parties contribute into that dance. If it's obvious that they don't want to talk, then find other persons to talk to.
Yeah, I definitely agree with, the idea that sometimes it's about your engagement, right? I've had a situation, similar to what you experienced, where this person who seemed very dull, very introverted, didn't, one-word answers, didn't really engage with anyone. But under the right circumstances and under, using the right questions and discussing the right topics, they seem to be the most talkative person in the room, right?
Mm.
And I think that's also reassuring because it has a sense of self-responsibility, right? If a person is seeing that, hey, I'm not having the conversations or I'm not engaging with the people around me, that maybe there's something that I can do about it, right? Maybe there's something that I can change versus, well, actually, everyone around me is just a boring person, I guess, and I need to, find other people.
You know what, Abdul? I have this. I have a dog, and she takes me out for walks all the time. And there's this man that I meet. Actually, I met him today as well, this morning. Almost every time I meet him, he complains. he complains about other people, and he says to me, I don't know why I just meet all those idiots. And I'm saying to him, this is so interesting because I go on the same round as you and I just meet nice people. What is the difference? It's your attitude. And I've been very blunt with him. I said, it's about you. It's not about them. It's about your attitude towards them that matters. If you believe that they are interesting and fun, then they will probably be more interested in fun, at least most of the times. So it's really a lot about your own kind of idea about yourself, and also your own self-worth and your self-confidence and your self-esteem and all that, but also about other people and what you believe in them. I have an old friend. Actually, he's not a friend anymore. He unfriended. The only person who unfriended me ever on Facebook was this guy. But I consider him a friend. And he said that every person comes in on a scale, on a 3, on a scale of 1 to 5. And then they have to prove themselves. So I proved myself, obviously, because I was up on a 4 or 5. And then I did not prove myself, and he unfriended me. I said something wrong or something. And I said, oh, that's so interesting, Henry, because for me, everyone comes in at least 4. That's my opinion when I meet new people. And then they have to prove themselves wrong, basically, because I start thinking about that they are good people, and then we'll see what happens. And I just find that my life is more fun that way. I enjoy life more because I have this idea that people are good. And then if they're not, of course, I will be disappointed, but I'd rather be disappointed when they're not than go around thinking that they are bad people, because my life will not be very fun then.
And in your experience, most of the time, do they meet the expectation or do they fall short?
This is so interesting because they often meet the expectation. There's been a really interesting study, psychology study in the US, I think it was, when you had 2 teachers. And one of the teachers they're supposed to get this new class, right? And so one of the teachers got comments like, oh, lucky you, the A team, you got the best class ever. And for the other teacher, they said, oh, I'm sorry. Well, it's only for 1 year. Hopefully you can get a new class later on. And then they looked in and analyzed their test scores. And the teacher who got this A group, the best group, got also the best grades and the best results on all the tests. And of course, the teacher who got the bad group got all the worst results and so on. The thing is that they were not bad or good. They were randomized. They just said it to see what happened. So the teacher's expectations changed the group's performance completely. So the students performed much better when the teacher said, I have faith in you. You are the good ones. And for me, that is so interesting because it's so much in our heads. And I'm not saying that on an individual level. You can still have an angel somewhere or an asshole somewhere, even though they're in the same group. But on an overall perspective, your attitude kind of colors the world in the colors you choose. So yeah, it's absolutely vital that you program your brain with the right kind of thoughts. Now,
yeah.
Does that mean, Abdul, that I am great in a mingling situation, like a cocktail dinner or something like that? No, I'm not. I can be on stage and I have thousands of people in front of me, and I'm good at it and I enjoy it. But then I can be in a situation where when I leave the stage and there's a cocktail mingling thing going on in the afternoon, and if I don't know anyone, I would get lost after a while. I don't know what to do. So I can get uncomfortable as well sometimes in those situations. Not all the time, but sometimes I just feel that like I'm on the outside. I don't know if you ever felt that experience that you're not in the group, you're outside from the group, like looking in, and that's not a very nice feeling. It kind of feels that you're not part of the tribe, so to say. And when you feel that, then you have negative feelings, which probably will show in your body language. And then, you get this kind of downward spiral going on, which is not so nice. And then perhaps a person comes and saves you, say, hey, come join us. And then all of a sudden you're in again and you feel good and all that.
So what do you do in those situations? When you're maybe at an event or you're somewhere where you feel just awkward, you feel out of place. Like you said, you're not in the group almost. You're kind of a rock in the middle of the water, right? And everything's kind of moving around you. What do you do in those situations? Is there any way that you can flip the switch?
Yeah, I mean, I can look for people that I recognize. that I know, or at least have an idea who they are, and I can approach them and say, "Hey, nice to meet you," and talk to them a bit. Because then, if they recognize me as well, then we can at least exchange some pleasantry, and then we're into the discussion. That could be one way of doing it. Sometimes I just, I can walk around, see if I hear anything interesting, or if I kind of get the feeling that those five guys, they are standing so close to each other that they cannot shield everyone out, and I'm not going to even try. I'm going to go somewhere else instead. But I probably will try to see if I can see a friendly face, or if I can recognize somebody that I've seen. Perhaps, let's say that this is the situation where I've been on stage or something like that. If I can recognize somebody from the audience, or somebody came up to me afterwards, I probably approach them first. But in that situation, it's easier because people probably know who I am, because I've been up there, so they know me. But if I'm, and if it's a cocktail party where I know nobody, then one can wonder why I'm there at all. I probably should know at least one person, so I can start talking to them, and from there I can build it step by step. But I'm not saying it's very easy if you feel kind of the odd man out or uncomfortable. But that's where bravery comes into the picture as well. Be somewhat courageous. Talk to somebody, ask them a couple of questions, see what happens. And if it doesn't work that time, it doesn't mean that it was a bad idea. It just meant that that person wasn't very interested, or that you executed the whole thing wrong. Then do it again, better. I think people give up sometimes too easily because the execution was wrong. But they should just look at the idea first. Was it a good idea? If it was a good idea, then it's just a matter of doing it better the next time.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel like, in those moments where you've had to be courageous, like is courage a necessary ingredient to good communication?
Well, yeah, yes. But knowing yourself is perhaps the most important ingredients. Knowing yourself and where you are. Because if you know yourself, then you can also understand that not everybody's like you, and then you can start being curious. So knowing yourself and then be curious is probably the two most important ones. And then comes courage. If you need to muster some sort of energy in order to approach somebody, that's courage. You're not going to get the guy or the girl unless you at least dare to talk to them. So yeah, of course there is something about that. But then again, sometimes you're just naive, which I love, by the way. I think that especially about young people, they just say, how hard can it be? And they just do it, And I think, oh my God, that's hard. I know it's hard. I've done it 3 times, 4 times, 10 times. But they just do it because they don't consider that courageous. It's just naive. And actually, when I started my company 15 something years ago, so many people came to me, oh my God, you're so courageous, you're so brave, how dare you, you had this great job in the global company, and the career was there, and how can you come up with such bravery? And I said, I wasn't brave, I just could not resist doing it. For me, that was not courage, that was just me following this inner compass, and I would be, and I it was like a magnet. I was drawn to it. So for me, that wasn't courage at all. But it was a great step.
Awesome. So I want to throw a bit of a scenario at you. We ask this to all of our guests at the end of the interview. Mm-hmm. And so, imagine you're going on a hike to the top of a mountain, right? Now, we all know there are things we can bring with us on our hike to help us reach the top, right? Bring some good hiking boots, you bring some poles, you bring some snacks, some water. These things, they help you on your journey, okay? Now, imagining that this hike is your life, right? And the peak of this height is when you've achieved all that you want out of life. You feel you've connected with all the people that you want. You've had all these beautiful experiences. This is the peak. This is the summit, so to speak. What are some characteristics, some things that you would suggest people bring with them on their hike of life, so to speak, that will help them along their journey?
What a powerful question that was. and one that I couldn't even anticipate. I'm stalling. Okay, so I would probably bring some teachers, some mentors, people that challenge me intellectually and mentally and spiritually, so that I can grow. That's one thing that I would like to bring with me. I will talk about people here, like general, but still. I would like to bring a couple of Sherpas, people that, you know what a Sherpa is? A Sherpa is the mountain
are
people
they the people
in the
that
Himalayas
guide you?
who helps the people reach Mount Everest. So they are the one turning ice to water. They are the one giving them the right track to go to and helping them with everything so that they can reach that summit. And let's call them your fans, people who support you. It could be your parents, it could be your friends, it could be other people that just, they are there for you. They help you. So I will bring a couple of those as well, so that I can get that kind of help from them. And then I probably will bring, I probably will want to bring some students as well. So I have some teachers, some mentors that I can look up to and get help from. Then I have some people around me that I know will be there and have my back. And then I will have some people that I can help on their journey as well.
That's awesome.
And that's probably why I'm in this pod with you right now, because you reached out to me and talking about, the who will listen to this and all that. And I thought to myself immediately, this is not my target audience, but it doesn't matter. The people who hire me are CXO or vice presidents or something like that of bigger companies, and you guys are not there yet. But I don't care. I just thought that this was something that I can give to you. I hope that whoever listens to this gets at least one thing that they have perhaps haven't considered or have considered, but now kind of strengthen themselves in their beliefs that this is a good thing to do. So that would be my answer, I guess. Yeah.
And it's actually kind of interesting because we asked this question to all of our guests, and something that I really like about your answer was that it all has to do with people, right? So a lot of the times when we ask this to other guests, sometimes they'll talk about, characteristics within themselves, courage, leadership, this kind of stuff. But what you mentioned is people, right? And it really emphasizes your kind of belief system around the importance of things like communication, of things like establishing these relationships with people like teachers and your supporters, and giving back and helping those around you. And I think that's a really amazing answer. So thank you so much for that.
Hey, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in to today's podcast. We are live every single Sunday. If you would like to listen to more episodes, be sure to tune into our YouTube or Spotify. We are also on all audio platforms. Thank you.